I'm Steve Baskauf. I am currently the convener of the Darwin Core Maintenance Group. Welcome, everyone. I thought I would just start off with a little agenda on what we hope to do during this session here. I'm going to start by reviewing some of the things that we've done over the past year, talk a little bit about what's coming up. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave in like 20 or 25 minutes. But hopefully we'll get to a point of asking general questions that are not about Darwin Core data packages. And then once people have asked any of those questions, I'm going to turn things over to John Wieczorek, who can say whatever he wants about what's been going on with the data packages. And I'm sure that some people will have some questions, and so I'll let him field those. So the past year has been a very busy year. The first part of the year, we worked on updating a bunch of accumulated changes that had been in the issue tracker in preparation for sort of clearing the deck for our anticipated review of the Darwin Core data packages proposal. So we were able to take those things through public review. And then after the end of that, there was kind of a little bit of a shift in the maintenance group in the sense that we enlarged the group to include some additional people who would bring in a broader range of experience to the group. That was a point at which I took over as convener of the group. And soon after, we began the public review of basically three components: a conceptual model for Darwin Core, which is something we've never had before; a data package guide, which is sort of analogous to the text guide, the XML guide, and some of the other guides that we have to tell people how to use Darwin Core with different serializations. And then associated with this, there was a huge number of term changes that were necessitated in order to bring the Darwin Core bag of terms into a state that was compatible with the conceptual model. So in some cases, it was just changing a couple words. In other cases, it was doing some fairly major revisions to the definitions. For example, the definition of occurrence changed significantly. And then there were a fairly large number of new terms that were needed in order to make it possible to include the types of resources that the data packages system would want to be able to handle that we couldn't handle before. So those three major components began a public comment period that started in September. We knew from the start that this is going to take longer than the normal 30 days, so we scheduled it for 90 days. So in September, the 90 days were up, but there was still discussion, and we were committed to continuing the discussion until there wasn't any more. So towards the end of February, the discussion kind of died down. We went through the 30 days of basically quiet period where there was no discussion, and that was a signal to us that we could draw the public comment period to a close. So at the end of that public comment period, then the maintenance, I forgot to say that prior to beginning the public comment period, the proposal, which was put of these three things, which was put together as a package, was assessed by the maintenance group. So a part of the process for making changes to a standard is the maintenance group has to make some decisions relating to stability, need, and what's the third thing? Anyway, we assess the proposal to see whether it meets the requirements that we have for to indicate that a term change is needed and is likely to be successful. So we did that prior to the public comment period. At the end of the public comment period, then one of the key functions of the maintenance group was to look at the comment and to determine whether a consensus had been reached on all of the parts of the proposal. So basically, during the comment period, if there was a situation where it didn't look like consensus was possible, then part of the proposal might be dropped out, or parts of the proposal would be modified until there was consensus. So by the end of March, basically the maintenance group was able to determine that a consensus had been reached on all of the parts that remained of the proposal. So since the end of March, John has been working super hard in actually making all of the changes to the CSV documents that we use to generate our list of terms and basically getting everything ready for the executive committee to I guess review's not the right word, to put their stamp of approval on. So just to clarify, the executive committee doesn't really assess the proposals on their technical merits, but rather they do an assessment primarily of whether the procedures have been followed correctly that are laid out in the vocabulary maintenance specification. So John has we've gone through one draft of this. One of the things that happens sort of behind the scenes, some of you are aware that for many of the terms within Darwin Core, there's an analog of the term that's intended to be used with values that are hierarchies. And so part of the change process is that once a change has been made to a term, or if a new term has been created, there's an automatic creation step of the IRI analog. So that's not something that happens during the review process, because basically what we do is take the term that's been modified or created and just change any parts of it that are required to make it sensible for use with an IRI value. So this is something we have done as a maintenance group have done automatically. So one of the reasons for needing more than one draft of this is to do some proofreading on that generation of the IRI terms. So we think that this is ready. I'm going to take a final look at that today, and then hopefully either today or soon afterwards, this will go to the executive committee for their final stamp of approval. So coming up after this, once the executive has reached a positive decision, then we will go ahead and publish all of these changes. So the list of terms will be updated with all of the new terms and the changed terms. And then we will add 2 new documents to Darwin Core, the conceptual model document and the Darwin Core Data Packages guide, which has the technical details on how to create data packages. So that should happen very rapidly, probably within the next week or so. And then another thing that happens automatically as a part of our workflow is that we have a memorandum of agreement with the Genomic Standards Consortium to update mappings between Darwin Core and the MIXA standard. So basically, anytime a change happens that is relevant to terms that are mapped to Darwin Core with MIXIS, we have a commitment to work with the GSC to update those SSOM mappings. So that, again, is something that will happen automatically once the publication has gone through. The next major step, as a part of the process of public comment, the decision was made to actually include the Darwin Core Data Packages profile and schemas as a part of the standard. Initially, we were not thinking we would do that, but it seemed, based on the discussion, to make sense to do that. So once those, so I think we have draft profiles and schemas already. We'll do the finishing touches on making sure that they are updated to the final changes that were made to all of the terms. And then we will, once the maintenance group has gone over that to make sure that it's clean, we will then go through a public review of the profiles and schemas and add them as a part of Darwin Core that hasn't previously existed. So that should be sort of the last step to making the data package functional. Once that's done, then we will want to pick up on some things that have kind of been pushed on until after this review is over. One of the main ones is the mineralogy extension. Ben has just told me that he's finished the draft of the implementation experience report and feature report to go with that. So we're looking forward to trying to rapidly move this through the ratification process. And then we have a number of other a variety of issues that people have brought up since the Darwin Core Data Packages review was underway. And so we'll pick up on those. And the other thing that was decided, which we haven't actually started doing because basically the data packages review has gone on for quite some time, is to go into a mode where we are having scheduled public reviews. So basically, once we create a public review, then we'll start or once we've completed a public review, which could take at least a month or possibly 2 months, depending on how complicated it is, we'll immediately start looking in the issue tracker for what should come up in the next public review. So the idea is that we would, rather than letting a large bolus of issues accumulate over a long period of time, we would try to keep the issues moving 3 times a year and then have more regular releases of Darwin Core. And so those releases then would involve the things that I mentioned before, which would be updating all of the schemas for Darwin Core data packages, the files that are required for Darwin Core archives, and then the mixes updates. So we try to do that regularly 3 times a year. So with that, that is kind of a review of where we have gone and where we are going. So at this point, I'm just going to open things up for people if they have any questions of like, how does Darwin Core work, or what are we going to be doing? But I would ask that you defer on questions about data packages specifically until after John has had a chance to talk. So are there any general questions? Because people can just raise their hand if they have one. Okay, I think that is doesn't seem to be any burning questions about that. Again, if you have questions, you can bring them up later on. So at this point, I'll just turn things over to John, and I will drop out with the hope of at least listening on audio to the second part of the meeting.
Thanks, Steve. I don't know if you mentioned it specifically, but one thing is people might be wondering when exactly can they expect all these changes to be ready? A date, basically. And so once Steve sends the message off to the executive committee, they have 30 days to make their decision. They usually turn this one around very quickly, like in the next meeting that they have. I don't know when that next meeting is scheduled for, and I don't want to pressure the executive committee to do anything in that meeting, but just to give you an idea. So it could be up to 6 weeks from now, let's say, that ratification occurs. In the meantime, all the effort that has gone into this is now complete, and we can focus our attention on the next round of changes, things that were discovered in creating of the data package stuff, reviewing all the changes that have happened in this last round. We have an accumulation of new things to do, plus some other ones that people brought up during the public review that were deferred for later. Um, and there are some other things that we will do immediately, such as take the ratified term changes and build the data package schema as well as the Darwin Core schemas that will now be managed as part of the standard. So that's something new. Never before have we had schemas be part of the Darwin Core standard. That will now be the case. The data package will be one, and the GBIF cores for occurrence and taxon and event will become part of what's managed by the maintenance group, as well as some other as yet not fully specified list of things that really depend only on Darwin Core that were proposed by GBIF, not by another community that manages their own extensions, such as identification history. Those are easy because they're just Darwin Core. Other ones are not so easy because they came from a different community, like all of the GGBN extensions, plus the OBIS measurements and facts extension. Not that the maintenance group couldn't also manage those, but there has to be an agreement on that. We didn't make them. Somebody else has a vested interest. They should have the right to say they want them managed or not, and that hasn't been decided yet. So all of that remains going forward. So I want to open it up for others' questions at this point.
And you're welcome to put questions in the chat or unmute yourself and ask either way. Yuta?
I have a question. John, you just said that there will be schemas for Darwin Core and Darwin Core Data Package. So how are these different? Are these different sub-schemas or different purpose schemas, or can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, good question. And it needs clarification for people who haven't been doing this for years. So, yes, there exist schemas already that had been created by and managed by GBIF for purposes of publishing Darwin Core archives specifically. So when I mentioned occurrence core, taxon core, and event core, those are the schemas that were never part of the standard, but have been the most popular way of sharing biodiversity data ever since they came into existence. So one of the things that's happened is that with all this data package work, GBIF has decided that, I don't want to use the word decided, I want to say that GBIF would like for the schemas that they use to be community controlled, not GBIF controlled. And since they're so tied to what's in the Darwin Core standard, like what is an occurrence? Well, all these fields are part of the occurrence. So that should be something that's basically defined by the standard, not by GBIF, and therefore should be part of a public review process, and that the artifacts that are created, these .xml files that define what fields can go in an occurrence core for a Darwin Core archive, will be in the public domain. And therefore, those schemas will also be subject to public review. So we'll propose what they should look like based on what the rest of Darwin Core looks like, and people will be able to review that before they ever go into production. And then the other change would be that the schemas would actually reside on the rs.tadwig.org website repository, and be accessible from there rather than from the GBIF repository. The Darwin Core Data Package is a different schema altogether. The schemas I've talked about so far that Darwin Core archives use are built on the standard, the part of the Darwin Core standard that says how that must be done, which is the Darwin Core text guide. The Darwin Core text guide basically says that if you're going to share data via these CSV files as text, then you need to follow these rules, and the Darwin Core archive is an implementation of those rules. So Darwin Core archive isn't actually part of the Darwin Core standard, but it follows the Darwin Core standard for the text guide in order to produce Darwin Core archives. The Darwin Core data package is a corollary to that, but when using data packages as opposed to using text. So the data package guide says how you must construct data package schemas in order to call them Darwin Core data packages. So it has a few extra rules on top of what a data package itself has for rules. And there are things like, well, you have to use the classes that are specified by the Darwin Core standard to build your tables from. And it has to comply with the Darwin Core conceptual model, and so on. There are a couple of other technical things about how you have to construct those. So a data package schema is much, much more elaborate than a Darwin Core archive schema, because in addition to just being a list of fields, it also says the relationships between tables that can be very much richer in structure, not bound by the simplicity that a Darwin Core archive is constrained to, which is one level of connection to a core. A Darwin Core data package has no core, yet there are all kinds of connections that can be made between events, occurrences, organism interactions, nucleotide analyses, all kinds of new stuff that was never in Darwin Core before, but is now as soon as the executive committee ratifies that. So does that help?
I think so.
A lot of information.
Um,
There are XML schemas for Darwin Core archives and JSON schema one for Darwin Core data package. You can come back, stew on that if you have further questions about it. Ask again.
well,
Is that okay?
I will not,
Okay.
I will think about it. Yeah, thank you very much. So,
Okay. Kate has put a link to Darwin Core archive schemas in there, and we have a question from Tashi that says, "Can you please explain?" I've been experimenting with CI/DOC CRM, which is an events-based system. I'm wondering by what means Darwin Core represents related events and related entities. Sorry if this is a dumb question. I'm fairly new to Darwin Core. This may be answered by the conceptual model, so I'll definitely be giving that a read. Yes, the conceptual model describes that part of our domain that we feel we understand very well. And it does so by expressing classes that are either classes in Darwin Core or from borrowed vocabularies like Dublin Core, and the relationships that we as a community understand to be true between them. It's not to say that there aren't other relationships that could be made or that there are other classes that could be added, but it's the basic fundamental view on biodiversity that we have based on the classes that we have defined so far. So yes, the conceptual model will help you to understand how things are related and in some sense as an abstract structure, but the data package schemas describe exactly how those things go together in what is essentially a database-like view of the conceptual model. So it's an implementation of the conceptual model using data packages as the sharing medium, let's say. So does that answer your question, Tashi? Seems so. Okay, cool. These are good questions.
Maybe to ask and answer a question that's been common in the last year or so. If you are currently publishing data in Darwin Core, nothing about that process needs to change. You have the opportunity to change based on Darwin Core Data Package once that's ratified, but the current publishing mechanisms are still valid.
Right. All the mechanisms stay the same. It doesn't mean that the schemas won't change. They were always subject to change. Every time there was a Darwin Core public review that added an occurrence field like cast or vitality, for example, those terms became available in those schemas. And so the schemas themselves adjusted to what the community was doing. That will still happen. I want to be sure to be able to answer people's questions, but if we have radio silence too long, I have some things that I'd like to discuss as well. Okay, I'm going to put out one of the things that I'm interested in. So, as we move into a Darwin Core world, I'll step back. Paul Morris says, as the Darwin Core conceptual model provides natural language labels to convey semantic intent, what would be involved in representing these relationships in an ontology? Yes, what would be involved is to actually be very rigorous about those relationships to create real predicates. Predicates are the things that describe the relationships. For example, an occurrence happens during an event. The happens during is a predicate. Right now, we have natural language labels to say what that relationship is. If we were to do an ontology, we would have to create actual ontology terms for what those relationships are. And we would have to define how exactly we were going to structure that ontology based on what underlying foundation. For example, there was an attempt to do this in the past for the biological collections ontology, BCO, and that was based on BFO, the basic formal ontology. And we would have to make a decision how we were going to root our ontology in higher level things, such as the BFO, or basic formal ontology. Those are two big things that would have to be done. And a separate thing to that is that our anticipation of making something like that would be that the ontology would be at yet another layer. So right now we have layers of Darwin Core. We began with what we affectionately call the bag of terms, and that is a list of terms. Basically what you would see on a Darwin Core quick reference guide, just a list of terms and their definitions and some suggestions about how to use them in different contexts. So that's the fundamental part of Darwin Core that's always been there. With this latest public review, we're adding two new things. A conceptual model that describes how we as a community agree that things relate to each other, and a Darwin Core Data Package guide, which is a specification for how to implement that understanding of the conceptual model when building structured data as data packages. So that's a separate level. The schemas are implementations of a conceptual model, and the conceptual model is an abstract layer to Darwin Core that is basically a non-normative, human readable talking about how we understand things to work. An ontology would be yet another layer on top of that to be used based on a conceptual model, but being an implementation of it that would bring into play a whole different level of understanding of semantics and the ability to infer things that would require quite a bit of development and rigor that is not currently in a plan. We don't have a plan to do that. Other questions? Yeah. Ricardo says, so I understand that what were previously extensions in Darwin Core will now be new schemas in Darwin Core Data Package. Am I correct? I thought schemas referred only to file packaging, like in Darwin Core Archives. So that's not exactly correct. Darwin Core Archives use XML-based schemas that follow the rules in the Darwin Core text guide. Let you digest that a moment. The Darwin Core Archive schemas follow the Darwin Core text guide to say how they're built. And because they follow that text guide, they're limited to star schema, which means you must define a core for that for your archive, and then you can connect other extensions to it only to the core and only to the identifier in the core and no further layers. The Darwin Core Data Package is very different from that in that it defines the entire structure. It's much, much more like ABCD in that respect. ABCD described an entire structure using XML schemas. Here, we're doing something similar, but using data packages as the schema definition language. So, no, there are no such thing as extensions in Darwin Core Data Package. We, in fact, want to actively promote the deprecation of the ideas of cores and extensions in data packages. They just don't apply. I hope that helps, but I'm curious if it answers exactly what you were trying to get at, Ricardo.
Sorry, I opened my microphone and just I get a little bit confused about the link about the extensions for the Darwin Core archive schemas because I think I was thinking in the Darwin Core that data package as you thought as before, like a whole schema with a lot of tables and relations and defining the schema, but not necessarily with extensions. But as I saw the link with the extensions, I get confused about and how it works in the whole framework of the data Darwin Core archive, how it will work at the future. I mean, I don't know if maybe there are some elements that we used to use for the extensions that are now lost in the new Darwin Core archive. Sorry, new Darwin Core data package schema. So that's why I get a little bit confused.
Okay. Yes, they are separate. You will use the Darwin Core Archive schemas for Darwin Core Archives only. When we built Data Package, we tried to incorporate as much as we could at this point of everything that is covered by Darwin Core Archives. And when I say as much as we could, I need to talk about the things that aren't covered. We don't cover all of the extensions that have been built through the community outside of the TADWIG community. For example, the GGBN extensions are not fully covered. The OBIS extended measurements and facts extension is fully covered in data packages through something called assertions. And the other thing that's very important to understand is that the Darwin Core Data Package is built for the sharing of primary biodiversity data, and as such does not accommodate the publication of taxonomies. That is left still to the Catalog of Life data package. And there was discussion during development of the inclusion of all of taxonomy as well in Darwin Core Data Package. But the issue is that our community doesn't yet agree about how to do that. We have the taxon cores from Darwin Core Archives. We have the Catalog of Life data packages way of doing things, and we have a brand new standard, TCS2, Taxonomic Concept Schema 2, all of which are not compatible with each other at this point. So if it is decided that it's important to include taxonomy within the Darwin Core data package as well, which to me seems like Darwin Core taking over the entire TADWIG world, then something has to be done about that reconciliation to be able to make a proposal for addition to Darwin Core Data Package. So those are basic things that Darwin Core Data Package doesn't cover. And on the flip side, there's all kinds of stuff that never existed before that it does cover. Happy for more questions. Can't see if anybody's typing or anything. So what I'm going to do now is say one thing that concerns me that I would like feedback on. And that is, having done all this work for the last 5 years, and now actually seeing it ready to go into production, especially building the documents that will be a result of this last public review, I wonder about something. We've had a Darwin Core quick reference guide since the very first day that Darwin Core became an official TADWIG standard. And that seems to be the most commonly used document for using Darwin Core. It's convenient, it's simple, it's easy to use. Now, what do we do when there's a whole bunch of stuff in Darwin Core that you can only use in a Darwin Core data package? And there are a whole bunch of people, more than otherwise, who will always want to just be using a Darwin Core archive. And so if we keep the Darwin Core Quick Reference Guide as a useful document for people using Darwin Core archives, then there's a bunch of stuff in Darwin Core that just won't appear there. And it also begs the need for some kind of a quick reference guide that covers everything that's in a Darwin Core data package. And so I'm wondering, I would like people's immediate feelings, not without thinking about it too much, immediate feelings about what would happen if the Darwin Core, if there was only one Darwin Core quick reference guide and it became more complicated and covered everything, versus having quick reference guides that are directed towards the different uses of Darwin Core, be it Darwin Core archives or via data packages. Is that, which one's worse? Is basically what I'd like to know. You don't have to answer that now, but it's what I really want to know. Elspeth suggests it would be good if we could easily filter. Cecilia says, would we need a new term suggestion template to accommodate that terms be implemented differently depending if it was shared in a Darwin Core archive versus a Darwin Core data package? I'm thinking about the discussion we had about biome source, where Darwin Core data package could reuse the Dublin Core source element, but Darwin Core archives couldn't. That's okay for interrupting. That's a separate discussion, I think. And it's a little bit in depth. I want to come back to that if we have time. Is that okay? Kate says 2 quick reference guides, a Darwin Core archive and a Darwin Core data package. Otherwise, people will be continuously trying to combine the 2 data models. Jutta says W3C has pages for vocabularies, for models, that is schemas, and for specific focuses. Right. So community or use case specific kinds of documentation. Yeah. Paul says the quick reference guide feels like it is a document at the bag of terms level. It gives the definitions of individual terms. A descriptive guide is needed at the levels above. So this is penetrating. If we accept that the quick reference guide is the document that's easy to get at every term that is suggested to be used by Darwin Core, it means it will be populated with a whole bunch more terms, a lot of them. And they may or may not be used in your Darwin Core archive. So, as a way to look things up, you would find what you're looking for no matter what. It would be in this bag of terms quick reference guide. And that there would be a different quick reference guide for the data package, which kind of gets into what Cecilia was saying. Because the data package guide has to always, sorry, the data package quick reference guide also has to tell you how a particular term is used in a particular context. I see there are more comments. Before I get to those comments, I want to share a link for something that you could assess. So I'll put this into the chat. And let's see, I need to change this to go to everyone. Did that come through to everyone? So that's basically an idea, an experimental idea for a quick reference guide for a Darwin Core Data Package that lets you get at everything about structure as well as everything about the definition of every term that's used there. So that's kind of like Paul's second level. It's not at the bag of terms level. It's at the schema level, essentially. So now I'll go back here. It looks like Ricardo says, I think it could be difficult for publishers if they saw that kind of change all of a sudden. I think a smooth transition is needed, and it could include maintaining the old quick reference guide at least for a while. I understand that. The question is what goes in that quick reference guide? That's ultimately the question. And the reason it's a question is because we have a whole bunch of new classes and a whole bunch of their new properties. And what happens if you're a data package person and you want to look up terms and you don't find them in the Darwin Core Quick Reference Guide? Because we're trying to keep it at the level of Darwin Core archives, what you can find in Darwin Core archives. So I'm not throwing that idea out there. I'm just wondering, as a maintainer for the Darwin Core standard and having the quick reference guides being built automatically each time that we make a public review, trying to think what the consequences of this would be. It's basically maintaining a separate kind of document, as I understand it. Okay, so moving on, Jutta says, apparently we also need a formalized way to define and describe rules and constraints that might be context specific. So yes, that's what the schema does. That's what the Darwin Core Data Package schema does. And it's also what the Darwin Core archive specifies how to do. So when you build a Darwin Core archive extension, in it, you need to define how it connects to some Darwin Core archive core. Basically, you say an identifier application history extension must connect to an occurrence core via an occurrence ID. So that kind of constraint is built into the schemas. They're not at the bag of terms level. Charles says, I really like the Darwin Core Data Package Relationship Explorer as a first exposure. It's visual, and you can click to get more detailed information. I'm glad you like that, Charles. I suggest playing around with the designer that I just made a link to because it includes a relationship explorer in it. DS says a Darwin Core Archive quick reference guide would also impose structure. That is the distinction between cores and extensions and the terms that are supported in either. Not list the terms under their class like in the current reference guide, which is not very meaningful in a Darwin Core Archive context. That is true. The further we go along with Darwin Core, even within the constraints of Darwin Core archives, the more and more it gets difficult to show the structure in the way that the Darwin Core Quick Reference Guide is built. Especially when you think about extensions, you might find terms arranged in different ways when you use extensions as opposed to the way they're arranged in the quick reference guide, which was based on the structure of the Darwin Core cores since the beginning. So basically, Matthias, what you're talking about is a level of a guide based on Darwin Core archives, a level of a guide based on data packages, plus potentially a full guide to all terms used. I need to mention that there already is a document that contains all terms, and that's the list of terms document. I think early on I provided a link to what that looks like, the draft of what that looks like right now. So that allows you to search through all terms. It's just not as friendly as the Darwin Core archive was. Darwin Core Quick Reference Guide was. Alicia, if you put them in one, can color coding help to distinguish between archive and data package? It would be, first of all, there are issues with colors for some people, but aside from that, a way to distinguish, there would be 3 states basically then, or maybe 4. Whether a term is used in a Darwin Core archive sense, whether it's used in a Darwin Core data package sense, whether it's used in an extension sense. It might be possible. It might also be possible to create different sections of a quick reference guide that instead of trying to color code them or even different indexes at the top to allow you to see lists and go into those lists based on some criterion. I'm hoping that we can capture the comments from this session.
Yeah, we
to
can
assess
definitely
Yeah.
send you a copy of the chat.
And you had your hand raised.
Yeah.
Did you want to say something there, Erica?
Oh,
Or
it's
was it
actually
Ben?
Ben. Ben, do
Okay.
you want to say something?
Sure. So see if people can follow me on this one. The geoscience community is very new to Darwin Core, the entire community. And so I think one thing, whenever I show people Darwin Core data package, the documentation, they're overwhelmed by the number of terms. And that's a natural thing. It does a lot of different things. It's flexible, it's just a natural part of it. But only for geosciences, it's only a subset of those tables that matter. Like we don't care about, genomics and these sorts of things. We just need to move that stuff out of the way. And so the way we envisioned it was having a button of some sort where you click on it and it would make most of the tables disappear and it would just give you exactly what you wanted. This is geosciences. The problem is curating that, because I may say that's not applicable to geosciences, but then you have to assume that the next person has to come along and say, well, I think it is, that kind of thing. But still, it makes it a whole lot simpler if you just can narrow it down very quickly to what those relevant terms are to a certain community. And I have a feeling that that may apply to other communities as well. Is that you, at least, you can get rid of geologic context for a lot of biology collections. They're not going to be pertained to it. You know what I mean? And so that would be a nice little feature where it's just a filter, right? And you could have colors if you wanted to. Colors are great. They're visually, people follow them really easily, but there are the color contrast things. But it makes it much simpler because at the end of the day, you still would have a master view where you can see everything. You can unclick every filter and you can see the entire thing if you really wanted to. Or you just have little bookmarks and you can just sort of narrow to your particular community view.
Right. So that designer that I gave the link to does exactly that for all of data package. You could use it to find any term that's used in a Darwin Core archive as well, but it would have all this extra stuff that's only in Darwin Core Data Package, and you wouldn't really know that a Darwin Core archive couldn't do a particular thing. So I would like to solicit feedback about that designer that I gave a link to and how well it works, at least for Darwin Core Data Package. And if it has merit, maybe we can do something similar for Darwin Core Archives as a new evolution of a quick reference guide. So
John,
Kate says, so go ahead.
real quick, what's a good way for people to give you feedback on that designer tool?
Email to me.
Okay.
I think.
And maybe if you are comfortable, put your email in the chat.
Yeah. Spell check. You gotta be kidding me. There, that's me. I'm not set up exactly to do it through issues in an issue tracker. That would be more complicated than just emailing me right now. So if we can go with that. Where were we? Kate. 2 quick reference guides, a Darwin Core archive one and a data package one. Otherwise, people will continuously try to combine the 2 data models. So it could be that something like a designer for Darwin Core archives, or something like Ricardo was saying, stay as close as we can to what we do right now for Darwin Core archive folks. Jutta asks, a clear explanation needs to be given in how they are different and when to use which. Yes, the introductions to each has to be very clear. I agree. There's the link to the designer again. In the designer you shared, could all the relationships be enabled by default as opposed to blank by default? They could. However, the idea here was to allow people to see only what they need because it's so complex that being devastated by all of it at the same time is probably more harming than only showing what you specifically asked for as a default. There is a way, I don't remember, I'm not looking at the designer at the moment, but I think there's a way to turn on just about everything at once. So what you're asking for is only a click away, I think. Jutta says, the more extensive the data package becomes, the more it might make sense to define business elements, for example, for geosciences, determinations, provenance, etc. This has been a conversation that has gone to both extremes, back and forth, like a metronome. And that is whether or not there should be data packages, in fact, for different communities. And I think where we've settled at the moment is that no, we should not do that. It creates a maintenance nightmare, for one thing. And the second is that there is a way to do this separate from the data package itself, which is through usage guides, which are in the works. And we hope to be building these based on use cases, specific use cases, and how would you do a particular thing with a data package guide. And we have a commitment from OBIS to collaborate on building this stuff so that we don't have theirs and ours as separate things going forward. Elspeth, I like the designer. Would it be possible to create links in here to the term in the list of terms? It may be that I'm just not seeing it. I don't remember the state of that. I'll check into that to see, and you're absolutely right. If it's not there already, then yes, for sure.
We're getting close to the end of the hour, but I want to make sure that folks know that the mineralogy extension has a working session. Then is it just in half an hour from now? And it might be relevant to some of you here.
Wow, it looks like we got a whole bunch more comments that I never got to. This is fabulous. This is great for me. I'm sorry if we don't have time to cover them all. We will have another meeting later today in my time zone. And maybe we can cover some of this stuff there as well if we get time there.
Yeah, the feedback has been really great. I think just to be respectful of folks' time, we should close out. But thank you so much, John, and thanks to Steve for the beginning of this hour. This recording will be posted sometime in the next week or so on the Tadwig YouTube. And with that, thank you all and have good days.
Erica, can you get me
I can get you the chat
comments
sooner.
sooner than later?
Yeah, I'll give you
That'd be
that
awesome.
in an hour or so.
Fine, that's perfect. Thank you.